Hello, friends. This is Alina, Holmquist Business Manager, and I want to provide you with some purchasing info and tools. Here's what we're going to cover today. First of all, we have policy number 3700 that governs our purchasing, and you can access any of our district policies on our website. Basically, you go to our district, school board, and then school district policies. Now, what do we have to do with regard to purchasing? Well, first, we can't have any conflicts of interest. So we can't participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract if we have a real or apparent conflict of interest. So this would be a financial or a personal benefit. We can't solicit or accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from a current or a potential vendor. Also, when we're having expenditures or doing a bid or a contract, we have to comply with state and federal laws. Procurement requirements exist to eliminate the waste and abuse of taxpayer dollars. That's why we have them. In addition, we can't split charges or projects to avoid procurement requirements. Procurement requirements are based on the dollar threshold for goods and services. So we need some definitions and examples. Basically, goods are those consumables, right? I've got some examples here. Now, software is a little bit tricky. So unless a consultant is used to customize software, software isn't considered a service. What are services? Well, it's that labor, work, or analysis provided by a contractor or a consultant. We're going to talk a little bit more about contractors when we look at public works on the next slide. But here's some examples of services. Now, public works, that's the work that we do, the construction, the alteration, repair, or improvement other than ordinary maintenance. And if you turn a building upside down and you shake it, what doesn't fall out is considered a public works. We've also got A&E requirements. Now, there's a lot more involved when we are dealing with a public work. So it's important that we contact the operations department for guidance in this area. This is a grid to help explain the procurement requirements that we have when we're using state or local dollars for purchases. Now, we do not have procurement requirements for books or services when we're using state or local dollars for purchases. What do we mean by books? Well, those are textbooks, curriculum, and instructional resources. And instructional resources are things like assessment tests, software, magazines, subscriptions, or kits used in lieu of workbooks. So what is this little matrix telling us? Well, it's telling us that we're purchasing goods and refer to the definitions that we covered. Under $40,000, we really don't have to do anything. If we're going to spend $40,000 to $75,000, we really need to get 3 vendor quotes. And we've got an informal vendor quotation form out on our Business Services Employee Resources page to help you with this. If we're going to spend greater than $75,000, well, then we need a formal bid, and that's a lot more involved. That requires a bid document or RFP being published. We will get proposals or bid proposals, and we need to evaluate those to pick the best one. We need to take a contract to the board for their approval. We're going to sign a contract with the vendor before we make any purchases. Now, when we're considering the cost of items, that does need to include the sales tax. And the auditors are going to look at the annual amount across the district, the annual amount for like-kind items. So if we estimate or anticipate that we're going to exceed one of these thresholds, then especially the bid threshold, then we have to act accordingly. And this can get complicated because we're a large district, and you can imagine if teaching and learning is going to spend $60,000 on computers, and then maybe the high school is going to spend $70,000 on computers. Well, we've already exceeded that threshold, the bid threshold, across the district for computers. And so then any computer purchase really needs to act like a formal bid is required. We'll likely do a piggybacking contract for that, and we'll discuss that in some other slides. Not all requirements are the same, and there are definitely more requirements when we're using federal dollars. Federal procurement requires that we use the more restrictive federal regulation, state law, or local policy for expenditures. And we have to apply these thresholds to the entire purchase involving any federal funds. So let's say we're going to buy something for $100,000. We're only going to use federal funds for $5,000 of it, and $95,000 will be coming from state and local resources. Well, because we're using some federal funds, we have to use the $100,000 in our matrix to determine what federal procurement requirement we have. In this case, it would require a formal bid if we were buying goods over $100,000. Now, less than $10,000 for goods or services, we don't have to do too much, except that there's a new federal requirement that we document prices reasonable, and we'll talk more about that later. We still have to ensure that we have equitable distribution amongst suppliers to the extent practicable. If we're buying goods $10,000 to $75,000, we have to get 3 vendor quotes, and goods greater than $75,000, a formal bid. For services, now we have some requirements, and we also have requirements for books under goods for federal procurement. So those are the 2 changes from using state and local dollars, is that under federal, we do have procurement requirements for books, and we do have procurement requirement for services. So services $10,000 to $249,999, we have to get 3 vendor quotes, and greater than or equal to $250,000, we have a formal bid process. Now we are working on a process and some procedures to potentially raise that $10,000 threshold to $40,000 to $50,000. We're hoping to get this implemented in September, and we will keep you posted. So here's some more information on documenting that the federal price is reasonable. And again, we have to do this for all purchases with federal funds. I've got some examples here because you might want to consider price with quality or availability in making the determination that the price is reasonable from the selected vendor. It doesn't have to be price, but price in combination with another factor. So many strings attached to the federal dollars, which is why we want to highlight this. We have federal suspension and debarments when we pay a vendor greater than $25,000 a year. We have to make sure that they aren't suspended or debarred from federal programs prior to any purchase. And we can do that a couple different ways. One way is to go out on the SAM, and we've got the website listed here, and we have some instructions on our employee resources webpage. But basically, you go out to this website where vendors can register, and then this organization keeps track of whether or not they're excluded or not. And when you check on the vendor, you can print that document. You want to make sure a date is on there and retain it for audit, because we have to prove that this was done prior to purchases. We could add a clause to a vendor signed contract or a PO. So again, using the PO, providing both sides, but getting the vendor to sign it. Or we could obtain a vendor signed suspension and debarment certificate. And we have an example of one of those out on our employee resources webpage. This applies to our purchases regardless of how we make them, whether we do it with a PO or with a P card. And since we don't know if this will really apply to federal P card purchases, we require confirmation for all federal P card expenditures. And you'll be getting that repeated in our P card PowerPoint. There are also federal contract provisions, and there are a lot of them. I'm just showing you a few of the common ones. Basically, we have to have provisions that, what are we going to do if the contractor violates the terms? And then we want the out that we can terminate for cause or convenience, reminding us that we have suspension and debarment requirements. And then if we're going to have a larger federal contract, we have some anti-lobbying language and certifications that we need. Piggybacking. Now we can use piggybacking regardless of the source of the purchase. So regardless if we're using, say, local funds or federal funds, we can do piggybacking. The feds actually encourage and authorize this as an economical and reasonable alternative to competitive procurement. So basically, in lieu of 3 quotes or a formal bid, we're going to rely on the bid awards and contracts of others. Now, we've already vetted some contracts for piggybacking for our tech contracts, and we have an approved tech contracts list. You need access to that, contact me. But basically, we have to complete a piggybacking checklist prior to any purchase if we're going to go this route. We're going to find an interlocal agreement or a purchasing cooperative that we have a relationship with, and we have to show what that relationship is. We need to review all the bid documents and the signed contract. So that means looking at the solicitation, the advertisement, the bid tabulation or the scoring, the evaluation, the governing body's approval. We have to show how we're complying with these requirements. And we want to make sure that the goods or services in this contract meets our expectation. We think it's a reasonable price, and we agree with the terms and conditions in that contract. Now, as we're making purchases, we want to make sure that the vendor is quoting this contract that we've already vetted, and we want to make sure that the price and the other elements are matching that contract. Now, Terry can help with attaching the completed piggybacking checklist to the PO. She can also help with attaching your quotes to the PO. Some other exceptions to 3 vendor quotes or a formal bid would be a sole source or emergency situation. Now, these should be rare. However, sole source means that we have purchases that are clearly and legitimately limited to a single source of supply. And we have a sole source form out on our employee resources webpage that can be used to document this. We also might have an emergency situation like we did with COVID, where our board actually passed some emergency resolutions. But this is a condition presenting an immediate threat to performance of essential district functions, or a condition likely to result in immediate physical injury to persons or property of the district. So basically, this is stuff that we need to do ASAP. And we need to complete that emergency declaration form out on the employee resources webpage. And it needs to be done pretty timely. So within 2 weeks of the purchase that we made. I've mentioned it a couple times, but don't forget that we do have an employee resources webpage. A whole section is dedicated to purchasing. And you get there by just going to departments, business services, and employee resources. There is a nice 1-page procurement requirement matrix that puts these grids together, lists the federal program codes and the contact, and it provides some definitions and important notes about purchasing. We've also got all of our forms out there, like the informal vendor quote form and example of suspension and debarment vendor certification, and piggybacking checklist, one for state and local funds, one for federal, and then the sole source and emergency declaration forms. We know that this is a lot. We know that complying with federal compliance requirements is a team effort, and we are definitely here to help. Thank you so much.